Welcome to Eye for Iran. This week, all eyes were on Washington, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump held a closely watched meeting that was heavy on praise. Trump told reporters that Iran wants to talk and said he'd love to be able to take the sanctions off and give Iran a chance. But Netanyahu struck a very different tone. In a Fox interview, he declared that Iran's DNA is, quote, no to America and no to Israel. Not a regime to be negotiated with, but one to be dismantled, he said. So here's the question. Even if U.S. and Israeli interests align, do they share the same red lines and the same endgame when it comes to Iran? Because if the goals diverge, so could the strategy. To help us understand what's really at stake, we're joined by Dr. Michael Doran. He's a senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute. He served in the George W. Bush administration, first on the National Security Council, then at the Pentagon as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Diplomacy.
Donald Trump seems to believe, and Steve Witkoff, I think, channels that a lot, that there is a way to appeal to the profit motive of Ali Khamenei, and that you can, they keep talking about, hey, let's make money together. Look how prosperous the Gulf could be if you would just cooperate a little bit on some matters of common interest. I don't think the Israelis believe that you're going to be able to turn Ali Khamenei into a good capitalist.
Let's get into it. I'm Negar Moshehedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Michael Doran, it's a pleasure to have you on Eye for Iran. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's start with the Trump-Netanyahu meeting in Washington, D.C. this week. Trump said that, according to him, that Iran wants to make peace and that he'd love to take those sanctions off and give Iran a chance. Netanyahu, meanwhile, was on Fox News, and he said something along the lines of, it's in the DNA of the Islamic Republic. No to Israel, no to the United States. So are we seeing a deeper, divergence here in terms of strategy between the U.S. and Israel? Of course, on the surface, they appeared very united, full of compliments when they met at the White House. But when you hear two very different types of rhetoric, are we seeing a divergence here in terms of strategy?
That's a great question, and I think one that everyone is asking. I was at a reception in the Blair House, the guest house of the White House, last night for Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I was milling around talking to Israeli officials, American officials, and trying to get an answer to just that. And I am going to answer your question, but let me just preface it by saying, I've been working on this kind of issue for 20 years, and I have never seen the Israeli government and the U.S. government so tight-lipped about what specifically the understandings between them are. No one is talking. And last night, I tried to squeeze a couple of Israeli officials to give me a little bit of information, and two of them said to me, "Mike, first of all, I'm not going to tell you anything. I want to keep my job." But secondly, they said, even if I was inclined to talk to you, I couldn't give you really definitive answers to the big questions, because some of the most sensitive conversations have taken place tete-a-tete between Trump and Netanyahu. But if we look at what we just saw with the United States participation in Operation Midnight Hammer and attacking the Iranian nuclear sites, and even before that, the opening up the Israeli operation Rising Lion, we were all surprised by that on some level, or both of those events on some level or another. But especially the Israeli attack, it certainly took me by surprise. It took all of those Iranian generals who were sleeping in their beds by surprise. And the essence of the surprise was the assumption that we all had. I'm talking about the generals and myself, that there was tension between Trump and Netanyahu, and therefore Netanyahu was going to be restrained by Donald Trump. So I'm at this point disinclined to see this as a really serious strategic divergence. I think it's a divergence in I was going to say rhetorically. It is a little bit more than that. I think still Donald Trump is inclined to try to solve this through diplomacy, if he can. That's his really real preferred way. The Israelis, I think, don't believe that diplomacy can solve it, but they're not particularly worried about this divergence between the two sides because they believe strongly, and I think the experience has supported them in this belief that Donald Trump shares with them their major goal, which is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
So that's interesting. That leads me to my next question, which is about what is the end game here. So, on our last episode of Eye for Iran, I spoke with Ambassador John Bolton, who told me that, in his view, as Trump's former national security advisor, that he views President Trump as being driven by optics, and that he does want to make a deal and go the diplomatic path, as you just said, maybe even get a Nobel Prize out of it. But Netanyahu does, in that view, see things differently because for him, the Islamic Republic is more than just a nuclear threat. It's a regime level threat, the existence of the Islamic Republic itself. He even warned recently that about the enriched uranium that has been unaccounted for. And he said something needs to be done about it, although he wouldn't say what he plans to do about that missing enriched uranium. So what's the end game for President Trump and for Netanyahu? And what happens if those visions don't align? I mean, you did mention the no nuclear Iran, but I think for Israel, it does go beyond the nuclear status as well.
Yeah, I don't agree with John Bolton's characterization of Donald Trump's policy. Um, Trump, of course, Trump is driven by optics. What president, what politician is not? And what does that mean to say they're driven by optics? Donald Trump is a politician. He has he has a base, a political base, and he wants to transmit to that base that he's looking after its interests. Now there's a bit of a tension within his, particularly the MAGA base, between those who want to ensure, even through military action, that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, and those who prefer the United States doesn't get drawn into wars. But we saw that 70% of Republicans, or something like that, some very large percentage, supported Trump, maybe even larger than 70% among Republicans. I think it was 70% of Americans, if I'm not mistaken, supported the strikes on Iran's nuclear program. So yes, Donald Trump cares about optics. He wants to show the American people that he's keeping his word about what he said very consistently. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. There is a divergence between the Israelis and the Americans on a kind of theoretical level, but I think the Israelis believe that the Iran has been knocked down a couple of pegs now. Let's take, for example, you mentioned the nuclear program and the nuclear material. The prevailing assumption among Israelis and Americans is that the nuclear material is under the ground in Fordo and Isfahan, maybe Natanz too. I don't know, but certainly Isfahan and Fordo, and the goal now is to keep it there. So that means when you say what we're going to do to make sure they don't do anything with it, you monitor the sites, and when they start digging, you whack them. It's as simple as that. So that's a much different proposition than trying to keep them from taking already 90% enriched uranium and put it and create a nuclear bomb with it. Now, if they did squirrel some of that enriched material away somewhere, and it's still under their direct control, and they can go open up, and they have some centrifuges that they stored away, and they can create a cascade and start feeding enriched uranium into the cascade. That's a different story. Right now, nobody knows that that's the case. But again, if they start doing that, and if the Israelis get wind of it, they're going to whack them. As simple as that.
So ultimately, what does Trump want, though, with Iran, and what does Netanyahu want?
Well, Trump would like, and I think this is a point where they diverge in their analyses, is that uh, Donald Trump seems to believe, and Steve Witkoff, I think, channels that a lot, that there is a way to appeal to the profit motive of of Ali Khamenei, and that you can, they keep talking about, hey, let's make money together. Look how prosperous the Gulf could be if you would just cooperate a little bit on some matters of common interest. I don't think the Israelis believe that you're going to be able to turn Ali Khamenei into a good capitalist. And I, I don't even know how much Donald Trump really deeply believes that. I think he thinks it's worth trying. I think also, and this is an important thing, he thinks it's worth being seen to try. He knows that the American people don't, well, they're not interested in getting dragged into another war with Iran. And he hopes that the drubbing that they took will knock some sense into them. The Israelis are skeptical, but not particularly worried about this difference. Again, I got to repeat, they believe that Donald Trump doesn't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon, and they believe that if the Iranians play their, if the regime plays its usual games of hide the ball and all of the sophistry it engages in, the Trump will get sick of it very quickly.
So, do you think that Trump kind of waited before any kind of American involvement just to see how successful the Israeli operation could be before, I guess, he tagged along, if you will?
I have no doubt about that whatsoever. 100%. That's exactly what happened.
So, do you think it was an implicit green light, or was it a little bit more nuanced than that?
More nuanced. If you want to go it alone, go ahead, but I get no guarantees from me. This is your war. Your war. Go ahead and fight it if you have to. Not necessarily my war. And then, the way I imagine it myself, and I'm going to sound a little bit more like John Bolton here. I think Donald Trump watched 4 days of tremendous success, or maybe more, of tremendous success, and thought, I'd like to be part of that. But that's a little bit unfair as well, because again, just takes us to this, it's all optics. I think I did not predict the Israeli attack. I got fooled, like I said, just like all the Iranian generals. But I did predict the American attack on Fordo. And that, because if you played out the logic of it, it was very clear to me from talking to Israelis for the last year that once this thing started, they were going to go all the way, which means they were going to destroy Fordo. One way or another. And there are only 3 ways that Fordo can be destroyed, if you're looking at it from the Israeli point of view. That's if the Americans come in with the massive ordnance penetrators, or if the Israelis go in on the ground with ground forces, or they drop a tactical nuclear weapon on the site, because they didn't have the bombs and the bombers that were the bombs big enough and the bombers strong enough to handle them. So if you're Donald Trump and you want stability in the Middle East and you don't want a prolonged war, and you're talking to Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who was telling you that he doesn't want to see a lot of refugees and regime change, and you're getting the same message from Mohammed bin Salman, and you look at this, but also knowing that you have said time and time again, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. So Fordo's got to go. The Israelis are going to go do it. If they do it on the ground, which is the most likely way that they would have done it, that could have led to all kinds of complications. It could have led to a really messy war. It also could have led to the Israelis going for a regime change, because they had a limited number of interceptors, and the Iranians were shooting, have a larger magazine of missiles than Israel has interceptors to intercept them. And if it got down to a point where Israel was running out of interceptors, they're not going to stop the war. They're going to take out the regime. So if you're Donald Trump, then the most elegant, easiest way to end the war was just to drop a few bombs on Fordo. Doesn't put a lot of Americans in harm's way, brings an end to the war, surgically, quickly. That was the smartest thing to do.
And what do you think, based on your conversations, like you said, with the Israelis, what do they think about that? If in a sense, it stopped the war and prevented potentially regime change?
The Israelis were never going for a regime change. They never were. uh, Prime Minister Netanyahu was talking about regime change in some contexts in order to put pressure on the regime. The goal of the Israeli military action really was to push the regime to seek um, deliverance from Israeli blows in the arms of Donald Trump. That's what they wanted, because the only power in the world that could stop the Israeli action was Trump. And Trump put conditions on it with the Iranians, no nuclear weapons. So they wanted to force the Iranians to turn to Donald Trump and say, please bring this to an end, or force Trump's hand, which they did, by going to Fordo. I forgot the question now. I had a very sophisticated answer for you, and I forgot
It
what was
was
the
about
question?
this is about so with the bombing, you
Oh,
said that prevents a
so
war from
yeah, so
getting to regime. Yeah.
they were never going for regime change. The Israelis want an end to the missiles, into the terrorism, and into the nuclear weapons. They know that Donald Trump doesn't want regime change. They know the Turks and the Saudis don't want regime change. In an ideal world, maybe they say, "Gosh, let's just get rid of the regime," but they never had a plan to do that. It was never in the cards. It was always about destruction of capabilities. So there's no conflict there.
So now let's flip to the Iranian side. In his interview with Tucker Carlson, Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, was really, he didn't say death to America. In fact, he tried to, interestingly enough, to basically kind of take away the pressure
I'm
from the
sorry to
Americans,
laugh.
if you will. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I found that interview really amusing. Go
No,
ahead.
no,
I'm assuming that all of your should we assume that all of your audience has seen that interview? Because
we can assume, or at least they've heard of it and kind of know the context of it.
yeah.
And Pezeshkian, I mean, the thing that really stood out to me was how he was deflecting from the United States and was like, "Oh, this is not about the United States. The Israelis manipulated you. This is really an Iran-Israel conflict. Has nothing to do with the United States." Um, do you think that he achieved any purpose in that, in terms of potentially creating any kind of wedge, or who's listening to that?
Oh,
Who is he
sure.
appealing to there?
I think it served his purpose, and I think they're clever. I mean, they're very clever. He's just repeating back to Tucker Carlson the rhetoric of Tucker Carlson. It's just giving validation to Tucker Carlson's worldview. And he did his homework. I thought it was, he also talked about, we want an end to these forever wars.
Yeah.
That's a,
Very deliberate phrase there, right? Very MAGA
yeah.
isolationist.
Yeah, and also to the progressives at the same time, because the MAGA isolationists, if you want to call it that, and the progressives have essentially the same worldview. It's on Iran. He was all sweetness and light. I was really amused. If your grandmother, if she's walking with a walker and having trouble getting across the road, you should call the IRGC. If your daughter needs some tutoring, to get through high school science, call the IRGC. Some people are claiming the IRGC is involved in terrorism, but have you ever seen such a thing? I've never seen such a thing. It was quite a performance, both by Tucker and Pezeshkian.
And do you think that this would actually, though, stick with anybody? Is anybody gonna buy into what his claims?
Well, the calculation, and I don't think it's a dumb one, is that there is part of Trump's base really doesn't want to support Israel in this world. They don't think this is in the American national interest. Somebody like me, I look at this and I say Israel is doing the work for us. This is totally in the American interest. If there's no Israel at all, it's still in the American interest. And we're complaining all the time about allies that don't stand up for themselves. Allies in Europe that don't pay 2% of their GDP toward defense. And then we have an ally who does, and oh no, look at that! That ally is trying to draw us into a war. You got to decide: do you want allies or not? And if you do, then Israel going after Iran is a perfect ally. Also, Iran is the enemy of the United States, and they've never ever hidden that. That's what's so funny, is that you don't. I mean, okay, they have these. They whisper, when I used to work in the White House, and I was amazed at the way that they whisper. The regime is really good at whispering. Back then we didn't have as much interaction diplomatically or much at all as we do now. So they would whisper through intelligence services and through Europeans that met with them, and Iraqis who met with them, and Lebanese who met with them. Anybody who met with them, they would send these sweet, loving, these kisses and love grams to us to say, oh, if we just sit down with them and throw money at them, we can solve all problems.
Yeah, I'm interested to know more about your time at the White House. Tell us a little bit more and kind of what you're describing, your, I guess, indirect interactions with Iran.
Oh, I was there from 2005 to 7. This is the moment when we were moving the nuclear file from the IAEA into the Security Council. We were developing, and once we took it into the Security Council, all of the sanctions architecture that Barack Obama took apart, which we thought was a quite effective, non-kinetic way of pressuring the regime, and so on. And I was very impressed with a couple of things about the Iranians. I thought, the Islamic Republic, that I thought was very, very impressive. One was this ability to talk on multiple registers, to keep different constituencies in play. Talking fire and brimstone and death to America in public, but then sending messages through key interlocutors that, oh, they really loved us, and we couldn't believe how much they loved us. If we would just spend more time with them, they would love us even more. The other thing that they were really good at, compared to us especially, was coordinating all of these messages through different instruments of their government. They did one thing I thought was really impressive when I was there. We put forth a proposal that they should negotiate with us over Iraq. I was against this. I thought this was really dumb, but we did it. They should negotiate with this at the level of ambassador in Iraq. Now, the Iranian ambassador in Iraq is an IRGC officer. He's not in the foreign ministry, right? He's a terrorist, basically. The fact that we're going to negotiate with them about Iraq at the level of the ambassador doesn't make the Iraqis feel any better. Once they learn, it makes them feel that we're negotiating over their heads with the Iranians. What happened? The Iranians didn't respond to our proposal. We put this proposal in. They let it sit for a few months, and then they answered it publicly in a speech with a lie. They lied, and they said that we had proposed to them to negotiate about the whole region at the level of foreign minister, and they would do that. And they were willing to have that negotiation. So we, of course, we don't lie like they do, which is stupid. I think we should lie like this a lot more. We came out and said, well, yes, we did propose talking to them, but not like that. But the minute we start to explain, no, it was at the level of ambassador, not, we've already validated what they've said. And they then sent, this is where it gets really interesting. They sent a delegation of, I can't remember, 12, 15, 17, a large delegation to Syria to negotiate with the Assad regime or to consult with the Assad regime about Syrian interests in this region-wide negotiation that was about to take place between the United States and Iran. Okay, it was all fantasy, right? And then they, at the same time, so they got this delegation off to Syria. They have a whisper campaign going on in Lebanon about how March 14th was going to be sold out in this negotiation between Tehran and Washington. And then they have this Arabic news program, Al Alam, I think it was. I can't remember
That's
anymore.
correct, Al-Alam, yep.
Yeah, and the Al-Alam correspondent on the ground in Baghdad is interviewing is interviewing people on the street. What do you think Iran should do in this negotiation with America? So they created this whole fantasy, but every arm of the government, the propaganda arm, the diplomatic arm, the military arm, the IRGC, they were all working, carrying out operations, negotiations, discussions, campaigns based on this fantasy that they created. And it was very effective. Our allies started panicking. The Lebanese thought we were going to sell them out. The Iraqis thought we were going to sell them out. The Iraqis were particularly angry because we're negotiating over their heads. I mean, we admitted that we wanted to do that, basically. And I imagined it. I remember sitting there and saying to myself, could the U.S. government get the State Department, the CIA, the Defense Department, the public diplomats, and everything, all to move out on a campaign like that? It was all synchronized. Not possible.
So, do you feel that their strategy is much the same now, or do you see any changes?
I think their techniques are the same. I think, I mean, they have been really weakened. I'll tell you, Nagar, something interesting is that I heard from multiple sources who I think really know, both on the American side and on the Israeli side, that the supreme leader today, we're talking about today, still doesn't know the full extent of his loss in the war.
Wow.
They for two reasons. One, they haven't fully, surveyed all of the damage in all the different areas. But secondly, nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news at every level, because they're afraid of shoot the messenger. I mean, the message is,
That
the
makes
line
sense.
is, we won big. We slapped the Americans. We slapped the Israelis. They have both begged for a ceasefire. We didn't call for a ceasefire. That was unilaterally called by the U.S. and the Israelis. So if in that system, if you're the guy who steps up and says, sir, actually, we had our asses handed to us in a sling, that's boom, off with your head. So what happens is everybody lies to their superior at every level, and nobody has really told Khamenei yet just how bad it was. I don't know when he's gonna be fully apprised of what happened to them.
So, what impact do you think that would have then overall on the structure of their regime and government?
It reinforces the extremism, actually, because I mean, their default setting is to strike out, to threaten. They're thugs. They're thugs through and through. So look at the Houthis. They haven't moderated the Houthis one bit. They will. They know. I mean, they're not dumb and they're not ignorant about it. They understand they had an arm cut off. But they will still use the other arm the way they always have. So I expect we're going to see, once they get their, they're like a boxer that's been punched in the nose, fallen down on his knee on the mat, but is getting up. He's going to shake it off. Once he shakes it off and he can see things a little bit more clearly, they'll start assassinating people. If the Lebanese start moving toward normalization with Israel, they'll assassinate somebody. They'll assassinate Ashara in Damascus. They're very good. They're exceptionally good. It's another talent they have at embroiling groups that are among whom there's tension with each other. That's what October 7th was. I mean, October 7th happened because Saudi Arabia was moving toward normalization with Israel, and Erdogan was moving toward a massive improvement of relations with the Israelis. And October 7th, which on the face of it had nothing to do with Iran, of course, behind the scenes, Iran was everywhere. But it was an operation carried out by Palestinians, by Hamas against Israel, and it had the immediate effect, of putting Saudi Arabia and Turkey, at least rhetorically, on the same side as Iran. Iran's whole, the Islamic Republic's whole resistance axis was put in the service of the global ceasefire movement. They said they didn't say we're going to fight until Israel is destroyed. They said we're going to keep up the pressure, the military pressure on Israel and to some extent on the United States and on the world economic system through the Red Sea until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. That and the Saudis and the Turks understood what the Iranians were doing, but that didn't stop them because of the emotive nature of the Palestinian question. It didn't stop them from taking a position that was basically supportive of that.
Wow, no, that's quite significant. So you believe that the Iranian regime, battled and bruised, will now try and do something like you said, assassinate al-Shara potentially to create chaos in the region to deflect from themselves. Is that kind of the tactic behind it?
I mean, the key strategic goal is you see Donald Trump. One of the reasons that Donald Trump has got this exuberant rhetoric about peace with the Islamic Republic is that he wants to create a new order and stabilize the region. And that's very scary. If you have Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Turks all getting along with each other, obviously it's not going to be a big, happy love fest between the three. But if they have a picture of the region, if the United States develops a picture of the region and does so in coordination with the Saudis, Israelis, and Turks, and they're all moving in the same direction, all working together to develop the economies of the region and to stabilize the region, that's a tremendous threat to the Islamic Republic. That's the biggest threat to the Islamic Republic. So what they're going to do is they're going to look for those lines of fissure and see where they can cause trouble. They don't have the missiles and drones to do it. They got the Houthis that they've been using until now. They're going to have to go back to older techniques, but they still know those techniques: assassination, intimidation, so on, and propaganda, which they're good at.
So try and break up alliances and that
Yeah,
threat that like you mentioned,
that's
this
the that's the
access.
pro that's the program always.
So do you
They're very good at that.
Do you think a deal would potentially change their behavior in that sense, not to wanna create that kind of chaos? Or what do you think needs to be done now then to prevent something like that from happening?
Oh, we just have to watch them and show that we know their game and make them pay a price when they play that game. And I wouldn't if I
So
were
more
Donald
war?
Trump, number one, huh?
More war maybe? More strikes,
Well,
more
no, I was gonna say
intervention?
the number one thing I think right now is don't remove the sanctions. Don't remove the sanctions. Keep the sanctions on and say you're not gonna have the money to rebuild until you give us what we need. And the bare minimum is no nuclear weapons, no missile program, ballistic missile program, and no support for terrorism. And they're a long way from accepting any of that. And then I would in terms of war, I don't think the United States needs to do anything except support the Israelis going after the Houthis. That's the last proxy that they have, the most dangerous proxy. Take it down.
So when Trump says, "I'd like to put one day lift the sanctions from Iran, I wanna make peace, et cetera," the Iranians, he said, wanna make peace, during the same meeting that Prime Minister Netanyahu is there. What do you make of that then? Like, what was his
He's
intention?
a, he's a businessman. He's always saying, "Look, let's get rich together. We can do it. Come on." But he's not. They tried to kill him. He's not. He knows that the guys across the way from him are nasty people, nasty thugs, and that it's the likelihood of them taking this is not great. But he wants to try. If they do take it, look that they are weak. They are weak. They just don't know how weak they are yet. They may yet come around and say, "Well, you know what? If I look at my options," I mean, that's what he's thinking. I don't think that. I think that they will, they'll fight this jihad against us and the Israelis until the day they die.
So when it comes to what's left for Israel in terms of military options, what do you foresee? Do you see more covert operations, assassinations, or actual, strikes again?
I think all of the above. If they go to start digging the 60% enriched uranium out of the ground, I think we'll see strikes for sure. Absolutely.
And going back to that meeting between Netanyahu and Trump, that happened at the same time that the Iranians were meeting with the Saudis. Was that just a coincidence in your view, or is there something more strategic behind it?
Oh no, they're on a charm offensive. This is the different register. So the day after the ceasefire is announced, the defense minister goes to China, the foreign minister goes to Russia, and then but they're sending messages to the Turks and the Saudis about how they want to get along with them, and the problem is the Israelis and the problem is Gaza, and if we could just get a ceasefire in Gaza, then all this would go away, and this kind of thing. And we're like you saw Pezeshkian, they don't they don't they're shameless, in terms of presenting themselves as the aggrieved party in all of this.
And we're seeing reports now that Iran is trying to purchase advanced Chinese air defenses. What are your thoughts on that? And is this, I guess, an unintended consequence potentially of the 12-day war that it brought Iran closer to China? How do you view that?
Oh, I'm sure that they're trying to buy those. That's really the only option. I mean, they are totally naked now before the Israelis, and you can't build a new air defense system in a week or a month or 2 months or even 6 months. I mean, this is a project of a year or longer. And if they buy systems that they're not familiar with, say Chinese systems, they have to train on them and everything. So we're not talking about something that can change the balance in anytime soon. I would be very surprised if the Chinese delivered them. They might. I don't want to say no. But the Chinese modus operandi up until now has been to stay one step removed. They certainly want to strengthen Iran. They don't want to see the regime go down. And so they will. What I think the Chinese will do, I think they're particularly interested in keeping the Iranian ballistic missile program going. So I think they'll give them the equipment to rebuild the program. And I think that they will give them the ingredients of the solid fuel propellant that fuels the most damaging ballistic missiles that they have against Israel. That's what I'm expecting to see. And I expect to see the Israelis carry out strikes to blow up any of that equipment once it comes. I'll be surprised if the Chinese give them air defense, but they might. And if they do, we'll see that blow up. That's what'll happen.
But do you think that in terms of like long-term alliances, that's going to strengthen this access between Iran and China?
Uh, this is a calculation that the Chinese are going to have to make. Um, I think that Donald Trump made that less likely rather than more likely by striking the Iranians, because he has showed that he's serious and that he's willing to use force and he's not going to be intimidated. So if I were the Chinese, I think I would probably be a little bit more cautious. But I say if I were the Chinese on the basis of what I've seen from the Chinese in the past. But who knows? Who knows how they're going to calculate it exactly? I don't know.
Michael, any final thoughts?
No, nothing I can think of. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a fascinating conversation with you. That's Michael Doran joining us on Eye for Iran. Thank you for your time. If you like this episode, hit the like button. Also, leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think. And you can also sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter. We deliver what you need to know with top stories, key analysis, and exclusive reports direct to your inbox.